And they live in kind of small, scattered villages. As we heard from Marilyn, this particular family here, they're reindeer herders. They lost their entire year's worth of meat stock. So it's having real economic impacts on them as a family. So when you sort of begin to look at the families in our case study, you know, they're living in very nice looking houses. To an outside perspective, you would say that they're not poor in any way. But as you can see here, they have to prepare these kind of emergency kits. So we've got sort of firewood, a backup generator, and emergency supplies of water. So when those frequent power cuts do hit, they can still continue their everyday lives. So even though in the general they live in a very rich country that you know, it is very equal overall, there are energy issues there around the provision of secure, clean energy. That means that they are experiencing facets of energy poverty. And this is just one of the main power lines into the village. And you can see here when it gets quite snowy and the trees get quite heavily laden with snow, they can fall over and pull these power lines down. But I would encourage you to go look at the rest of the exhibit. We've got photographs from Hungary, from France, and Spain as well. So for the next few slides, I'd like to show you some images of our web portal. So really this is the main way in which the Observatory exists. And it's the largest single collection worldwide of resources on energy poverty. So we have a range of different resources on there. We have an interactive statistics dashboard where we have 4 primary indicators of energy poverty, and as well as that, 22 secondary indicators that provide a range of supporting information on the problem of energy poverty. So our 4 main indicators, we found that, and as you will know, many of you will know already, energy poverty, it cannot be measured with a single indicator. As we've heard already, the complexity of the problem means that there is not a single indicator that can capture that adequately. And even with 4 indicators, there's still aspects of energy poverty that we simply will not be picking up with those indicators. So the important thing to bear in mind is every single one of those indicators listed there, it will pick up a different aspect of the problem. And it's really useful, we think, to view them in combination, to see them as a suite of indicators that support one another and pick up different groups of households. So we're somewhat limited by the provision of data that exists across Europe, and it is relatively poor, but we are working towards trying to bring in new, or bring about new data infrastructures on this. But our indicators mainly look at expenditure on energy, whether households are spending disproportionately more than other people in their country. And on the flip side, if they're spending too little, so if they're dangerously under-consuming, we call this hidden energy poverty. And we also look at 2 self-reported indicators from the EU Statistics on Income and Living Conditions, which I'm sure many of you are already familiar with, concerning arrears on utility bills and whether a household feels they're able to adequately heat their home in the winter time. And there's a range of different ways that you can use our statistics dashboard. You can look at the data over a longer period. You can break it down by things like income groups, by tenure type, by the type of property, and also if they live in a rural area or if they live in an urban area. We also have a really comprehensive knowledge and resources section. As you can see here, we've got things like list of relevant organisations. We have over 350 examples of practical policies and measures that are in place across different European countries. So this is really a wealth of information on how different countries have gone about trying to alleviate energy poverty within their own region. And we've tried to make it as searchable as possible. So you can see on the right-hand side of this image that you can filter on a range of different things like country, what type of socioeconomic group it's targeting, what the funding method is, so whether this is coming from, say, government resources, if it's from energy supplier levies, if it's a loan or if it's a grant, and also whether it's targeting a particular energy source. So if this is looking at people who are using heating oil or if they're on mains gas, and so on. And similarly, we have a publications database, and this was a really fun exercise for me as an academic. So it was just amazing to see just how much knowledge already exists. So we have around 550 scientific articles from the period of 1983 to now. We're just in the process of adding in articles that have been released within the last year. So we expect that to grow even more, because we've seen just this huge growth in people publishing on this topic. So there's really just so much knowledge just in that database there. And again, you can search this by country, by theme, you know, if it's looking at people who are renters, people with disabilities, all those kind of different topics you can search by, so you can really narrow down that list to what you're looking for. We're trying to compile a really comprehensive list of organisations who are working on this problem. So if you don't see your organisation listed here, if you register as a member, it's free. Then you can submit your organisation to the list. And really our hope here is that people can go and they can find people to work with. If they're looking for people in a particular country for a funding bid or something, they can just go there and have a full list of everyone who's trying to address this. And we also have a range of different training resources. So unlike the policies and measures and the publications database, this is material that's sort of more practical in nature. It's things like toolkits, really practical information on how you actually go about finding households at the doorstep, talking to them about this problem, and ultimately implementing practical energy efficiency measures to try and alleviate the problem for them. And we have a range of different things on here, including videos and, as I mentioned, toolkits. And we'll shortly be releasing the first of a series of our own training resources produced by the Observatori. And this is looking at how stakeholders can engage with decision makers at the national level, how they can get messaging across to them on particular issues. So I'd really encourage you to go take a look at all of the resources that we have. Get in contact with us, have a little chat with us about if there's anything missing. Please do submit them. The other thing I thought it might be useful today to reflect on is some of the gaps that I feel exist within work to address energy poverty. So I think there's been huge progress. It's very evident there's been huge progress on this topic. We already know a lot about the characteristics of energy poverty, the type of households that are most likely to be affected by it. We know a range of measures that are effective. So there's a huge amount we've already done. We've made great strides in bringing about legislation at the European and the national and the local level. But I think that there is a lot that remains to be done on this topic. So this is really gaps that I've identified while working on my own research on energy poverty for the last 10, 11 years, but also as part of working on the Observatori. So I think, firstly, it doesn't really need to be stated there, but the provision of statistical data is just poor across the board. But in particular, there's really a gap in our understanding on household needs and their particular practices, so the way that they behave in an everyday sense in using energy. This is largely absent from the statistical data that we use as a community. Similarly, there's really this sort of lack of adequate regionally specific and targeted data. So whilst there's quite a lot of data at the national level, we can get a lot of aggregated figures. When we start to drill down to a local level, really the amount of data sources available starts to thin out. We feel like there's very little research has been conducted within Scandinavian countries, and generally there's an attitude that the problem does not exist there. But as we've seen from our Jokkmokk case study, and as we've heard from people who do work in those countries, there are gaps. There are people who live in rural areas who are particularly affected by really expensive heating oil, by vulnerable power supply. Some people yesterday spoke about cooling in summer, and this is an area that to date hasn't really been discussed that much, despite the fact a large number of countries in Europe do suffer from quite extreme temperatures in the summertime. So we need to really develop a much larger evidence base around the impacts of that, and consequently to develop better research and data sources on that problem. There's also a gap in our understanding around the economic impacts of poor quality energy supply. So particularly for people who might run their businesses from home. And recently this is a topic that's starting to be discussed, but electrical safety does not tend to feature very often when in discourses around energy poverty. But the International Federation for the Safety of Electricity Users, or FISIO, is running a campaign right now on this issue, and they really want people to think about what it means if a household, say, is tapping into an electricity supply, perhaps not through entirely legal means, if they're having to do repairs at home because they cannot afford to get an electrician out. All of the different ways in which risk in terms of fire can be introduced into the home. And I guess lastly, a lot of the ways, particularly at a European level, when we talk about legislation, it tends to come through the internal market on sort of mains gas and mains electricity. And this leaves a few gaps in terms of other types of energy carriers, so particularly around firewood, and especially if that's self-collected firewood, but also things like heating oil and other forms of gas. So those markets do not tend to be as regulated as mains gas and electricity. There are issues there around the way in which prices are allowed to increase uncapped, but also the fact that those suppliers of those energy carriers often do not contribute to any kind of support schemes, unlike those sort of larger gas and electricity companies. Obviously there are a huge number of other gaps, but those are the ones that I think we can do a lot to address right now in the short to medium term. I guess my last thing I'd encourage you to do is just to engage with the Observatory. So it's not just the consortium leading this, we want it to be something that you feel you're part of as well. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. So we have a Twitter account. I've listed here the main EPOV account, but also Stefan and mine's accounts as well. As I mentioned, the web portal, www.energypoverty.eu, is the main way in which we exist. We would really encourage you to come along and contribute documents to our publications database, to become a member. It's free. When you join, you can write blog articles, so if you've got some exciting news about a project, you can submit that. If you've got an upcoming event, again, you can list that on our calendar. And if you're doing any kind of practical schemes, then we'd love for you to submit your schemes to our catalogue and measures so everyone else can see what you're doing. And if there's a lot of innovation coming out of that practical project, then we can discuss jointly writing a case study that can be distributed to stakeholders so you can pass on some of the key learnings from that particular project. And we do run a number of events across the year, so we have an annual conference in Brussels, but we also have small workshops planned across the project, and indeed there was one here in Spain earlier this year, which hopefully some of you attended. But otherwise, definitely just get involved with us. We want you to engage with what we're doing, to tell us if you don't agree. In particular, it would be good to hear your thoughts on what we can do differently. But also if you like the material as well, it's also good to not always just get negative comments. So it's good to hear what you like and what we can be doing more of. So thank you very much everybody for your attention. I think there is a little bit of time if anybody has any questions. So over to you. Thank you.
DG Justice and Consumers at the European Commission. Harriet, specifically, how can municipalities best engage with the observatory? Because as you say, there's a lot of information out there, but it could be a bit overwhelming. So is there a specific aspect that's relevant for municipalities?
Yeah, that's a really good question actually, and I did neglect to mention that we do have a project ongoing with the Covenant of Mayors. So we're just wrapping up a scheme at the moment where we worked with 5 municipalities to develop a pilot project on energy poverty. We were trying to, as a group, see what kind of new small-scale projects could be implemented by a municipality. And we'll be producing some documents about that soon. But more broadly, the Covenant of Mayors now it now has energy poverty as one of its main actions. So if you are a member of that through your city, then that's one way of getting involved. But otherwise, there's certainly a lot of material on the portal that is appropriate for people working at the local municipality level. Like I said, you can filter the material to try and find relevant material, but also talk to us and we'll try to put you in contact with the best people to help you. Because the coffee hasn't come out yet, we'll need to wake up a bit.
Alguna pregunta més? Vale. Can give a round of applause.